Okay, so we've had conversations through this week, from Monday up until yesterday, about this situation that the country is in as concerns what many then have said is a crisis, is an economic crisis. We're looking at a very bad situation that Kenya will not be able to pay its loans, that clearly is not able to develop the country, is not able to provide a good enough buffer for citizens because of the constant borrowing and then what would be touted as the inability in a very short time to pay. And from a fiscal point of view, from a budgetary point of view, from a national responsibility in terms of government point of view. But today we want to look at it from the point of view of the public. And what is it that the public can do to actually take steps towards solutions for this. And so we're delving into that conversation today. And we will be joined in the studio, or rather we are already joined by the Executive Director of the Community Advocacy and Awareness Trust. That's the CRAWN Trust, and that's Executive Director Daisy Amdany. Daisy, good morning.
Good morning, Du. Good morning to Wanjiro and CT in the studio and to all your listeners.
Yeah, good morning.
Morning, Daisy.
Asante Sana, thank you for joining us. And, like I said, we've been having this conversation through the week. Yeah. And I think snippets of what we want to talk about have found their way into those conversations. But now we want to open it up and say what public can actually do.
Yeah, Daisy, it's been an interesting week. We talked about government's COVID response. And on Monday, James Muraguri told us this is not a COVID budget. The government says it's a COVID budget, but really the money is going elsewhere. And possibly, apart from the large infrastructure commitments, there's a lot of money going into debt repayment, as we know. So COVID is not getting adequate funding. Tuesday, we talked about revenue taxation. And of course, that one is, needs no repeat. Kenyans are overtaxed. The IMF program identifies the need to raise more taxes. The IMF was instrumental in the lifting of reliefs that were cushioning Kenyans against the COVID pandemic, were instrumental in increasing VAT on fuel, and there are other taxation measures in the offing. On Wednesday, we talked about corruption, debt-fueled or corruption fueling debt. And yesterday, we had a very interesting conversation asking whether Kenya is headed the Greece way. And whereas it looks on the face of it like we are not, some of the fundamentals indicate that we are not that far away from Greece. And so a very important process is taking place, and citizens seem to be on the sidelines, and we're not happy, and citizens are complaining, and we've also had a lot of back and forth about the role of citizens. Are we to blame? Are we very dependent? Is it the leaders? Back and forth. So, Daisy, what's your take? You're an activist and a champion for women's rights, women's engagement. You have talked about the need to dissolve parliament, take them home. You actually have a court ruling on that. You're also a champion on Linda Katiba. You're really at the forefront of mobilizing citizens. And citizens are missing out on one of the most important discussions. What's your take?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, Wanjiro, for that. My take, first of all, is that I actually think that we're in a not so good place as a country, and I don't even want to be prophet of doom, but Kenya is actually in a very precarious position, and the citizen is in the dark, because for active citizen engagement there has to be transparency and openness from government. But right now the government has been completely opaque about, first of all, the IMF program and the commitments that they have made to IMF, and what those commitments, the implications of those commitments on Kenyans. So the first thing is that we must understand, for effective citizen participation, information is required. And it is also a constitutional requirement, because Article 201 in the Constitution makes it mandatory for all arms of government to ensure openness and accountability and transparency in financial matters. We are not seeing that. So we don't even know what the IMF, what the government has committed to IMF. We're just seeing those consequences coming to us. And I really want to thank you, Shiro, for being in the forefront with TISA and the Okoa Ochumi Coalition, really in terms of being able to break it down and try and share this information with Kenyans. But we're going to have to do so much more because we are competing with politicians. In fact, for me, I keep telling people that a lot of the politics that you see happening right now is an effort to distract Kenyans from the real issues, because our politicians and legislators who are supposed to be representing the people are actually not addressing the pertinent issues. And maybe it's because either they don't have solutions to these challenges that the country is facing, or they are so overwhelmed so that, it's an act of sweeping things under the carpet and waiting for things to blow up. And for us to be able to forestall that, it now falls upon us as active citizens, civil society groups, to organize around understanding where our country is and being able to break it down to people. The good thing is that many people are feeling the effects of it, all of us. And, this is not a case of Wanjiko, which is, the colloquial name for the ordinary citizen. There is no Kenyan who is not feeling the effects of the IMF program and the government's commitment through, increased taxation, increased cost of living, inflation, So everybody knows that we're in trouble. If it is civil servants, they're not being paid on time. Doctors are not being paid on time. I just heard in the news reel that, teachers are threatening to go on strike. We have so many, so much civil strife because of the government not meeting its recurrent obligations. You talk to members of parliament, and you remember in parliament, the members of parliament threatened that they were not going to pass the financial bill unless their CDF money was released. We're coming to the end of the government's financial year. CDF that should have gotten at least 100 million, I think by 2 months ago had only gotten 16 million. So everybody knows that the government is actually facing a very serious cash crunch. It is irresponsible that our leaders are not addressing it. But then that doesn't mean that we as citizens should fall into the route that our leaders are trying to run around the people. We need to bring this discussion to the people, and as a matter of urgency.
Daisy, when you talk about bringing the discussion to the people, I see this twofold. Like, first of all, a fundamental understanding of exactly what is going on. That because it needs to be translated into a way that people can understand, because it is this body out there externally that has given money to Kenya. That's what we know. And essentially, maybe the primary message that is reaching is that, all right, this money is going to be used to boost the country in one way or another. But there's a lot more that's going on. So involvement means a total understanding. And then beyond that, there is a call for citizen participation. How exactly? And I'm talking tangible. How then is the public to be involved in this?
So I think that the first thing is for civil society organizations. So those of us that are, able to engage with the information, because we must remember that a lot of people shy away from engaging in matters of the economy because they consider it a very esoteric discipline. Sure. that is away from the grasp of many people. But the truth of the matter is that it is not. However, we do have entities, civil society organizations, TISA being one of them, IBP, IEA. There are those entities that can actually engage with the information, but it is also important that that information be made available. For instance, we need to know the extent of Kenya's indebtedness. Our debt register is not up to date, okay? Right now, if you go to the Treasury website, which, by the way, generally they put information on the Treasury website, but right now, if you go to the Treasury website, our debt register is only current until 2018. okay? So we really do not know the extent of Kenya's indebtedness, and then that becomes very difficult to understand what we owe, who we owe, and how much, and what are the terms of those payments. Another thing is that we need to understand the role of the IMF. Remember, in fact, I know there's been a campaign, about stop loaning Kenya. But right now, the IMF have come in to shore up Kenya and to ensure that our creditors are paid, okay? And that we are able to reorganize ourselves and hopefully, in that reorganization, outrun the debt, Now, is that being done? Many of the measures that we are seeing here in terms of because one of the things that the IMF requires from the government is that they will increase their revenue base, because our problem is really a spending, right?
Right.
So we're spending more than we have, and so we are borrowing to plug in the deficit. So the government is actually supposed to rein in the spending while coming up with measures of increasing the revenue. But of course, the measures are swinging very aggressively against the ordinary citizen. So those of us who are able to engage with the information, if we can get current information, is to look at what is it that can be done and make concrete proposals that we can take to Parliament. Because I'm also curious to know the measures that we see in the IMF program that have been proposed. By the way, those measures were not proposed by IMF. It is the Treasury that have gone and said, this is what we're going to do, and this is how it will increase revenue. In fact, you can see it. If you go to the IMF website, you can download the entire program, and you will see it's listed, And you see they talk about the taxes that they are going to increase, the measures they are going to take away that will have the effect of increasing revenue. However, the unintended consequences of that is that with increased taxes, then you have job losses, you have companies going belly up. So the unintended consequences is actually further shrinking. So it is now up for us to come up with proposals, concrete proposals of alternative measures that can be deployed and begin to advocate for those.
Daisy,
and mobilize citizens around those ideas.
Daisy, sorry to cut in.
No problem.
We've had fiscal consolidation programs in Kenya before. We haven't had citizen engagement. Citizens, Kenyans get angry, we talk on Twitter, but we don't have a culture of engagement. What's your expectation that citizens will engage? For instance, you've been on a campaign also on the gender rule, which is an important constitutional provision. You even have a court ruling that talks about the implementation. This hasn't happened. So do we really have an expectation that citizens will come up and engage? And what have you learned, or what are the practical tips that we can employ to get citizens to come up and make their voice heard?
Well, I think that one of the things that we must do is to let Kenyans know what is going to happen if they don't engage, the consequences of not engaging, because indeed we have had fiscal consolidation before, but I don't think that things have ever been this bad in Kenya, where we have a multiplicity of layers of crises. And, the government has used COVID as a great scapegoat, but we know that even before COVID came,
there was a problem.
The country there was a massive problem.
Yeah.
In fact, if they were smart enough, they would have used COVID as a lifeline. Because with all the COVID funds that came pouring in, they could have said, this is our opportunity to begin to set things right and, scapegoat COVID. But not, they went on with business as usual and even stole COVID money, So it is important that citizens understand what not engaging means to them, not just to them in the immediate, but also for the future. Right now, we have a huge youth population that is at a point of desperation. We need to unpack this, and I mean unpack it in a not diplomatic way.
Right.
the other thing is that we need to go toe-to-toe with this government, because the other thing that we've got to understand is that this government has very efficiently used public relations and social media, the spaces where young people and many Kenyans engage, so that government has now become the purveyor of fake news and distorted information. The place that you are supposed to go to for genuine news, for correct information, have now deployed bloggers and, Twitter,
Daisy, I am going to ask you for examples of this fake news, but please continue.
There's plenty of it, including fake news about people, about some of the engagements that we've been in, But so we need to churn out on those same channels correct information with verifiable information, because when you go to the IMF website can be a source of truth, okay? Because remember that one of the things that government has been telling us is there's no crisis, we're not broke, things are not okay, but everything tells us differently, okay? We're being told there's no government that survives without borrowing, and Japan, have outrun, their GDP and everything. But the truth is, they borrow in their own currency and they owe themselves money. What does it mean for us as Kenya? Looking at the shilling, how the shilling is performing on the international market. So we've got sources of truth that we can go to, because government makes full disclosure to the IMF so that it can get support. So we must go to those sources. We must break it down in easy to understand information, not using the usual jargon that is there. And I will tell you that when people understand and they are able to relate it to their personal livelihood issues, they will be mobilized. Because we are all feeling the pinch at the household level.
Daisy,
okay?
There's something, you've said many things which are actually really, informative and interesting. Now, I want to list the things that I'd like you to explain further. Let's start with a term that you use. Wanjiru uses fairly often as well, so it's something that I'm getting accustomed to. It's called citizens' engagement. Paint a picture of an ideal situation where an activity will qualify as being a citizens' engagement.
Okay. So we get the information, we break it down. We're able to tell Kenyans, this is actually what we owe. This is what the government is budgeting for. This is the deficit. So, for instance, government is saying they anticipate to collect 1.9 trillion shillings in revenue. They've gone ahead to budget 3.2 or is it 3.6, okay? And this 1.9, they are anticipating with all the harsh measures that we are facing, okay? This is added taxation, this is removal of benefits and all this. They only anticipate 1.9 trillion. They've gone, they are budgeting 3.2 or is it 3.6 trillion. Our debt obligations stand at 1.17. So from our revenue alone, this is after they have squeezed you to the limit. Once we pay off our debt obligation, they are going to be left with about 800 billion. This is the wage bill. Our wage bill alone is 800 billion. So there's absolutely no money.
Nothing left.
Yes, the government, nothing left. Government has refused to rein in its spending, to stop non-priority spending and begin to address this issue comprehensively. Instead, they are looking for more ways to now come at you with more taxes. So what this means for you is, and you give them the consequences. Teachers are now not being paid, so your kids are not going to go to school. You can't afford to go to the private schools that they own and send their children to. You won't be able to get health care because the doctors are not being paid. Medicine is not there. So you paint this picture. So what shall we do? This is the proposal. We are saying government must stop this project, because it's a non-priority project and it will save this much money. This money should be deployed towards this, and we develop citizen petitions and we tell them, this is what you need to take to your respective member of parliament. You need to organize yourself in groups. You need to send a petition to your member of parliament. Meanwhile, in Nairobi, Okoa Uchumi has written to all members of parliament informing them of the same measures so that citizens, both at the grassroots and at the national level, are speaking the same language. And we are here on Spice FM and every other media that is available, mobilizing citizens around it. Build a coalition, a cross-section of coalition, different sectoral interests to begin to rally round those measures that have been discussed, like the example that took place in Ghana, right? Where citizens, civil society, and other interested parties came together, began to engage with the IMF, and I think that TISA has led us in that initiative where the Okoa Uchumi initiative is actually actively engaging with the IMF to try and understand what is this program so that we can then take it back to the people. So that is what citizen engagement will look like. And I will tell you that it has been effective for us, particularly in being able to mobilize action for women around the 2/3 gender principle, which you've seen. I know a lot of people say, oh, yeah, it's just the women in Nairobi, but we've mobilized women around the country.
You've actually gone ahead and asked and led to the second question that I was going to ask.
Okay, in the studio with Nduoko CT Muga, our guest host for the week, Wanjiro Gikonyo, and joining us in the studio today as we look at what can the public do, Daisy Amdany, the Executive Director of CRAWN Trust. And before we went on to the break, Daisy, you gave this, for me, great, tangible way in which Kenyans can actually be involved in this, ways in which you can say, I'm lending my voice to this. CT was coming off that break with a question, and I can see the smoke already still coming out of his ears. And he wants to ask, Mashinani, what's going to happen, CT?
Well, clearly, my colleague and my self-appointed prophetess has actually asked the question that I was going to ask. And
I don't get paid enough. I don't get paid enough for this.
Self-appointed.
Yeah.
The idea, the thought, the process of representing the interests of the public is laudable. It's something that should be done. It's a gap that needs filling. But I look at the 47 counties that we have in this country, and I'm asking the question, which I've asked before, not to you, but I keep asking it. In these 47 counties, what networks are you plugged into? Citizens forums in all these places. How do you go about ensuring that they understand exactly what you understand? That's one. And two, how then do you also ensure that what is understood by you is broken down so that this Mwananchi that you speak of understands exactly what you're saying? Because when it is said the way you're saying it, there is no guarantee it will be understood as it should.
Well, one of the things that we do is we work through partnerships. And you can be certain there is no county in Kenya of the 47 that does not have civil society groups, CBOs, FBOs, citizens organized in one way or another. So it is important that we build linkages and work through partnerships, which is what we do, okay? Like, for instance, for us as women, we actually have a platform called the National Women's Steering Committee, where we have partnerships across counties, and we also host a network that builds linkages where we literally engage in networking and alliance building. And so we have regional partnerships that cover all the 47 counties. So that is there. The other thing that we do is we have dedicated point persons from those counties, people who are able to engage with the information. And those are trained. We actually have sessions where you train them. Whatever information you need disseminated, you train a cohort of point persons in the counties to understand the information and share with them whatever publications are there and whatever information, flyers and IEC materials, that they can then go and train their people at their level, and even go on to vernacular stations and speak to people in a language that they understand, communicating this information. Meanwhile, at the national level, we engage with policymakers, right? And say the essential same thing that the people are saying on the ground. only in a different way. Of course, at the national level, we will speak to them in the language of policy that is understood by government, okay? But let me tell you something, Siti. You really need to look at citizen self-mobilization at the counties. Even when you look at the last general election, how many counties had nearly 100% turnover of their leadership because people understood that these guys are not representing our issues. Citizens mobilized to throw out, MCAs and governors that were not representing their issues. And we must not forget that every general election, there's about a 70% turnover of legislators. The other thing, and let me share with you a story, and I'm sure you've heard it, of a boda rider in one of the counties who, the government is obliged, government at every level is obliged that for every development that is taking place, they put up, signs, they put up the billboards and everything that indicates what this project is, what the outcome is expected to be, who is supporting it, it's being supported with which funds and whatever. And so this boda rider this was supposed to be a 10-kilometer road that was to be tarmac. And you know that one of the avenues that people use to eat money is that you don't do the full road. So you build, if it's 10 kilometers, maybe you build 7 or 8 and you eat
eat
3 or 2, yes. So this
or
guy
it's a
was riding
50-meter road and you only make it 30. Yes.
Exactly, something like that.
Yes.
So this guy actually realized that the extent to which the tarmac was going was actually shorter than the 10 kilometer. And so he measured, he rode on it, measured it, got his colleagues, and he said, this thing says that this thing should be 10 kilometers, but it's not, and so they rode, and they realized actually like 2-3 kilometers has been eaten. And they actually went and petitioned, and they were like, we want to know where the rest of the money, where these 3 kilometers have gone to. And through that citizen activism, citizen self-mobilization, they were able to get answers from the county government that ended up completing that road.
Right.
Okay? And you see, that is information that is there, even if it is PDF. We've been, to some parts of the country in constituencies where you print out for the citizens the project that their MP is reporting in Nairobi to the CDF office have been done. And they will tell you, there's nothing like this on the ground. So we must remember that citizens must be mobilized. Because don't forget that people are living their day-to-day lives. There's competition for a lot of people's attention, including problems, right? So to get them to pay attention to what is happening with governance must be deliberate. Some people are like, I don't have time to engage and I don't understand this stuff, but you have to make them understand why it is important. And let me tell you, it is gaining traction, which is why one of the things that is being fought even by some of these government agencies and state officers is public participation. Because they know Kenyans aren't that dumb. And when they understand issues, they will run with them.
You've talked about challenges because that's the truth. And I give an example of COVID. When COVID came along, we had interesting conversations with a lot of people. And what did they tell us? That, you know what, this is nice. This COVID thing that you're talking about, great. But guess what? I have had malaria. I've had Nile, I don't know what. I've had the cerebral. There are other things that are contending for my health. So you're telling me I've been washing my hands. Thank you very much. We already held up by all of this. So there is a certain quota that has already been taken up by so many things. So Daisy, by the time we are telling people, because we look at active lobby countries in the world, it's not as if these folks don't have anything else to do. They also have families that they're taking care of. They have children that they're sending to school. But then we have some very active people who make sure that every piece of legislation, for example, if it doesn't need to be questioned, they know exactly what's going on. We've had examples here of citizens of Switzerland who will have a very serious meeting. You think it's a conference here because they're talking about the naming of a road. Things like that. But here there's so much that's contending for the attention and the mental capacity of Kenyans. You're thinking about health. You're thinking about sending your children to school. So I hear you when you're saying that there's so much that is fighting for people's attention. Making it clear, however, that you can do something if you don't do something, then we're getting deeper and deeper into this hole in which we currently exist. How do you get them to understand that we understand that things are bad, but if you don't get engaged at this level, it would only get worse?
By showing them how those problems that are fighting for their attention are directly linked to the maladministration, the fiscal maladministration. And when you are able to draw linkages and show them that if you don't pay attention, you're going to continue with these problems. And these problems will be resolved by you actively participating. That is how we do
Daisy,
it.
give an example of this linkage that you speak of. I'm a dog with a bone on this particular issue today. Give an example of the linkage.
Daisy, can I jump in and try? Because there was an example that came to mind. Citizens are supposed to engage in the county budgeting process. Nairobi County under Kidero, because obviously there was a lot of expectation once devolution started. Nairobi County under Kidero was doing public participation at the ward level. So they went round the first year, collected views and everything. Second year, they did that. The third year, when they went to the wards, they were chased away in about half of those wards. Citizens said, we do not want you here because we gave you our proposals last year and you have not implemented them. What Kidero was forced to do actually was, one, to work with institutions like ourselves. Ahadi also came in to reorganize the way they were doing the public participation by designating a certain amount of money for those projects. So through, and this is not, how can you say, this is citizens just saying, we asked for medicine. We still don't have medicine. So the problem is not citizens engaging. The challenge is when government doesn't respond. Then citizens can become disruptive. And part of the problem I think we have is not really, maybe the middle class are the least engaged, and maybe the middle class engage on Twitter. But at the local level, citizens definitely do engage. But Daisy, the question is, when government is unresponsive, what are the strategies that we need to use to tell citizens they're unresponsive, but we need to push them for accountability? Because citizens might say there's nothing that we're going to achieve.
I like your example. It is a good example, but this example of Nairobi, 72.9% of our population is still in the rural areas. How do these people get? And these people also have governors. They have all the structure that Nairobi has. Well. The point I'm trying to make is really a simple one. The examples aren't enough. Not where the bulk of our population is. And they're not enough because when you talked about linkages, how do you get someone to understand that when these 5 shillings that you keep getting, understand that this 5 shilling equals a classroom. Understand this equals running water. Understand that it equals a solar system for your healthcare. This 5 shillings equals, cumulatively of course, equals health facilities right across the county. That sort of communication and the linkages, and I'm saying, yes, we have people, our people are organized. They have all sorts of groupings everywhere around the country. But plugging in so that this information that in my mind is good and needs to be cascaded actually gets cascaded not once, not twice, not periodically, but daily, that people actually understand.
Daisy, I mean, how would you be able to wrap that up? I mean, so that we're understanding how it can actually be infused with this fiscal information, revenue information, so that they know in the groups that are already there, how can then they plug in? As you give your final words on this for us today, as this conversation comes to an end.
Okay, so one of the things that is coming to my mind is the issue of higher education, okay? Because in the rural areas, one of the things that gives a lot of pride to many parents and many communities is that their young people, their children are able to access higher education and get, access to that higher education. So one of the things, that is an area that you can engage with that people understand, because they do fundraising. You'll find they will sell their plots, they will sell even their cow to get their kids into university and hope that they can access something like help. Now, when you look at the IMF conditionalities and what the government has committed. Among those is to look at 3 of the largest universities in Kenya and come up with some measures to address, spending. The 3 highest grossing universities. So, and those are the ones to which many of these rural people hope to go to: University of Nairobi, KU, Moi University. Okay, you are hoping that they will be able to access the help. But now look at what the IMF restrictions are doing. Fees have tripled.
Right.
Help, the money that is going to help, has been reduced, which means that your kids are probably not going to access that higher education, which means fewer job opportunities, which means that after you have invested nearly a lifetime in getting your kids through school, you end up with kids at home doing nothing without opportunity. Now, that's something that Kenyans can get around, okay?
Right.
So you begin to explain to them, IMF do not come into countries that are well run. They come into countries and economies like ours, that are badly run, where the credibility of public finance is wanting, where corruption in public funds cripples even basic services. So even your right to education is hampered. Water, where you can't even get water, clean water, and health, the socio-economic rights that are guaranteed to you. These are the things that people at the rural area are most concerned about: decent housing, education, healthcare, and what. Now, this is information that you can break down to people and tell them, because they have mismanaged money so that they can have this shiny railway that it's not helping you with anything, or the shiny freeway that is not helping majority of the Kenyan citizens.
Yep.
And they have denied your children this opportunity. And this is what we must do to be able to restore the ability of your kids to access information, to access higher learning, to access support from government, to access that higher learning, healthcare, and all those things. So if we're able to, when we are able to break that down, because when you have these conversations with the people and link the majority of their problems, because if you look at the main problems that people are struggling with: food, education, healthcare, those are the major issues that people are struggling with, both at the national and the rural level. And so when we can link the problems that we are having to the fiscal mismanagement, maladministration of the state, and the measures that need to be taken, they will definitely rally around it, because they will see that those measures can put money into the government's pocket to allow for their children to access these things.
Thank you so much, Daisy. It's been great that you've been in this conversation with us today. Really eye-opening elements that you've brought out. Asante Sana for joining us in the room, and we look forward to having you in further discussions of this nature. Asante Sana.
Thank you for having me.